work session meeting of the San Marcos City Council to order. Today is Tuesday, August 1st. The time is 3 o'clock. And Ms. Trevino, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Prather, Mr. Scott.
Here.
Mr. Gleason.
Here.
Mayor Houston.
Here.
Ms. Garza. Okay. Mr.
Here.
Thank
Here.
you. Mr. Gonzalez.
Here.
Mr. Mendoza.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
All right. Next, we will have our citizen comment time period. And I have a new thing to read that I think is on the printer. The City Council welcomes speakers. Okay, somebody's not on mute. The City Council welcomes speakers at work sessions and regular meetings. Persons wishing to speak during citizen comment or the Q&A answer portion of a work session. We have a new method, which is to sign up online. And to sign up online, you go to sanmarcostx.gov, find Government City Council, citizen comment at council meetings, or you can still sign up in person at the city clerk's office. Either way, the deadline is noon the day of the meeting. If you request to speak online, a call-in number and link will be provided, so be sure you put your email address on there. Speakers may speak once during the citizen comment time period and may not yield time to others. If you speak about a public hearing topic, we ask that you not repeat the same comments again during the public hearing on the same topic at the 6 o'clock meeting. You have 3 minutes to speak. When you state your name, you have a timer on the screen. You'll see that you start in the green. When you get into the yellow, you have 20 seconds left. And when the timer is red and it says your time is up, your time is up. The mayor and council will endeavor to ensure that meetings are conducted in a courteous manner and in an atmosphere free of defamation, intimidation, personal insults, profanity, or threats of violence. And I believe we have 2 speakers today. Is Ms. Capoletta online?
Let me check there. Sorry, I just had issues.
I'm sorry, I need a moment. They just now moved me over. And for context, I work for a living. And I've just been in Google Meet. And I have to adjust my camera angle. And I have called this to city attention on multiple occasions that speakers who are in the waiting room should be in the meeting and not just jettison over like we're in the middle of the Hunger Games and you pop us out the chute and expect us to adjust our camera angle. And I even sent an email. And so I'm not sure why city staff are resisting this. You would think that they would be happy that people have showed up to city council. I'll begin my speech now. Good evening. My name is Lisa Marie Capoletta, professor, in case the mayor's not aware. They call me LMC. And I'm very concerned that you guys did not announce, she just made a new announcement about ground rules, but she didn't do it before the last meeting. Maybe she did, and maybe I missed it. If you've changed the ground rules, it should have been announced at a previous meeting. Moreover, am I to understand now, and the mayor loves to interrupt me, so you can explain this after my speech. If I talk about cats and dogs in this speech, I can't talk about cats and dogs in a different speech at a different time? Is that the new ground rules that we have established, or were you just recovering that you were reading standard citizen comments for the 6 p.m. and trying to recover and gloss over that? Because I think the Attorney General probably needs to know if we can't talk about cats and dogs in the 6 p.m. meeting, because we talked about cats and dogs at the 3 p.m. meeting. That's not the purpose of citizen comments in 2 different meetings. Now, if you are an elected official during the Hopkins Overlay Project, you should be concerned, because Hopkins now has a situation where first responders are having to slow down on speed bumps because of those reverse engineered speed bumps, because city staffers are so concerned about engineering human activity. If your child is in the middle of a choking hazard, or your loved one is in a trauma wound situation, according to city staff, quote, "Those are one of the sacrifices we are willing to make." And we are comfortable with that decision. But yet they don't have any follow-up reports to indicate that it's peachy keen. Somebody's is hot, reverberating around for everybody. And so I think that that's very arrogant of city staff to make those life and death decisions. Moreover, what I think is arrogant, somebody's mic is hot. And I would ask that I get mine. Lori, your mic is hot. And this is about you. So Lori decides that she's going to spend another $12,000 for little cones that the entire town thinks is okay. And for some reason, when Mr. Carson has a concern, you guys are willing to spend the money. But when everybody else in Barrio Pescado is pissed off about sidewalks, or over in Blanco Gardens is pissed off about sidewalks, you ignore them. The entire community thinks that those little, I don't know, little buoys that look like a video game are gone. But now, and see, the city staff are not coming clean. They're not saying, they're not giving a press release. They think somehow social media, they need to tell you how much those cost, how much they cost to replace, and now why they're putting it up when the whole town thinks it's gone. And then on top of it, they're blaming the Ice House for it. When they didn't reach out to the Ice House or any of the small businesses, and city staff seem to think that we have an unlimited supply of money because they didn't do their due diligence. You guys have the power to end the sidewalk program. That is what city staff are telling me, and I'm asking you to defund it. Oh, thank you for your time, and God bless San Marcos.
And I show that Ms. Harper was here.
She signed up, but I don't see her.
Perhaps we'll see her at 6 o'clock. And to clarify, the only thing new and the comments that I said was the fact that you can sign up online. Now, I did not say you can't say the same thing at citizen comment at 3 and at 6. I merely asked that if you're going to speak at citizen comment and public hearing, that you not give exactly the same remarks twice, but you can address the topic.
There are no public hearings at the 3 p.m. meeting. So
Yes, but there will be at 6. Okay. So we will move on to our meeting, if that's all for citizen comment?
Yes.
Correct, Mr. Trino? Okay. So we will be on item 1.
Okay, receive a staff presentation, hold discussion regarding municipal settings designation, MSD, and provide direction to staff.
Ms. Reyes?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. In 2020, the city purchased 3 properties downtown on Guadalupe Street. During the city's due diligence, the city discovered concerning contaminants associated with the dry cleaner business previously located on those properties. Consequently, both the city and the seller reached a consensus that the property should undergo a voluntary cleanup program in compliance with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ. As part of this cleanup process, the city is considering a municipal settings designation in the downtown area. This designation will help to facilitate the regulatory process for future redevelopment efforts. The MSD offers a streamlined approach to address environmental concerns. It also sets cleanup standards tailored to the planned land use, and it makes urban redevelopment quicker and easier. Today's presentation will discuss the on-site environmental findings, determine the next steps for establishment of the MSD, and explore various options for the short-term activation of the properties. I'm now going to turn it over to Assistant Director of Public Works, Adam Rossing, who will lead us through the presentation. Thank you.
And thank you. Council, thank you for hearing our presentation today. I'm going to go over the background of what we've completed so far, review the municipal settings designation, the MSD use, and that includes the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ corrective action. I'm going to review the findings. We will review the findings in the voluntary cleanup process so far, the MSD next steps. That includes the interim activation of the parcels, and I'll be asking council for your direction going forward. The background, city acquired the 3 properties on South Guadalupe Street in 2020. During the due diligence, during the purchase, some contaminants of concern were found that are related to the dry cleaning company that was there. The property owner and the city agreed to apply to TCQ under the Voluntary Cleanup Program, the VCP. Upon closing, $225,000 was withheld to help with the TCQ clearance. So far, staff has initiated the MSD process to facilitate the future downtown development. These are the three properties that we'll be talking about: 128, 140, and 152 Guadalupe Street. Progress to date. So far, the city has contracted with Chapman Engineering to manage the clearance process. That includes the drilling of the monitoring wells, soil and water sampling and testing, and that's initial and ongoing sampling and testing. The Chapman has been preparing the required reports and responses to TCEQ, and then they're also on hand for recommendation of the process for the site to facilitate the redevelopment. This is the Texas Risk Reduction Program. It's been in effect since 1999. It's not a new program, and really this just clears the permitting obstacles for future development. The MSD requires an ordinance that prohibits the potable use of groundwater. That's the drinking, to use the water for drinking within the MSD boundary. This also clears the permitting obstacles. This establishes the standards for environmental compliance to streamline the future development and provides the framework to reduce cost, time, and uncertainty to obtain regulatory closure. This does not eliminate the groundwater assessment for future development and cleanup requirements, although there are more than 400 MSDs in statewide, so it's not a brand new thing. Examples of the cities are Waco, Bryan, McKinney, and the San Marcos MSD boundary is focused on the downtown redevelopment. The proposed MSD boundary is from CM Allen to the east, University to the north, Moore North Street, Comanche, Shady, and Fredericksburg to the west, and the railroad tracks to the south. I'm going to turn this over to Cal Chapman with Chapman Engineering, our environmental consultant.
Thank you, Adam. Mayor and Council, thank you very much for having me, and our geologist, Tony Becker, is going to speak in a few minutes also. The MSD area that has been outlined, as you see on the map, includes 109 different water well reports that are logged by the Texas Water Development Board. It's interesting to note that all of these wells are present because of environmental assessment and cleanup activities for a pretty wide range of contaminants that have been found over time. There are no water wells being used for domestic or public purposes in this MSD area. The city supplies water to all the properties. You have an ordinance in place already that would prohibit these landowners from putting in additional water wells. So we're not affecting anybody's potential water supply if we apply the MSD. That's an interesting point to note. Our company has been involved with the city on these three properties since June of 2020. Another firm had done the initial environmental assessment work as the city was entering into purchase agreements. I beg your pardon, I need to click it, okay? Thank you. My apology, I got to learn how to run this thing. So our company has conducted a lot of additional installation of soil borings and monitoring wells so that we can take soil samples and groundwater samples, get them analyzed at an environmental laboratory, and then report those results to the TCEQ. And those analyses end up telling us what kinds of contaminants are present, what the levels are at each of these particular sampling points, and how they may be changing over time. All of that is very important in this overall process. We are now performing semi-annual sampling and analysis of the groundwater monitoring wells because the contaminant plume is basically under control. We have completely defined the limits of the contamination, both in lateral directions and to depth vertically. And this is good news. We don't have contaminants moving with any kind of speed. We don't have contaminant levels that are very high away from the original source area, the middle of these three properties, which was the dry cleaners for, we think, many, many years, probably from the late 40s into possibly the 80s, with on-site solvent use. The contaminants we now find are related to historical operations. There's not any new material being released. That's good news. The thing about dry cleaning solvents is we call them chlorinated solvents, but they are synthetic chemicals. These are not things like a gasoline or a diesel. I'm sorry, I thought okay, now we're on the right slide, I hope. So, chlorinated solvents are synthetic organic chemicals. This means that biological things, bacteria, don't eat these and break them down. They do break down chemically, but very slowly over time. So we know that the original dry cleaning solvent, the best one we've really ever come up with, it's called tetrachloroethylene. Is that on our next one? Excuse me a minute. The contaminant plume limits have been determined laterally and vertically. I said that a moment ago. If we were not to apply the municipal settings designation, we would be monitoring these chemicals in the soils and groundwater for years, decades, maybe even a century before Mother Nature would break these levels down low enough for us to get regulatory closure. If we were to actively try to clean up this contaminant plume, it would take a huge amount of money for relatively little gain. And we know that we can manage the process of having these break down over time because the contaminants are not moving with any kind of speed, and they're in geology that is very, very tight. They can't move farther downward thanks to a massive clay called the Navarro. That's what isolates the Edwards Aquifer much deeper from anything shallow. The Navarro clay is a great friend of ours in this contaminant pattern setting. The other thing is the breakdown process, even though it takes a long time, since the contaminants are not moving, we're using time and we're using natural processes to get rid of the contaminants. So the state of Texas, because of this corrective action rule set that came in 1999, allows us to learn what is the risk associated with the contaminants. If there's virtually no risk, we don't have to go actively clean up. We can do a long-term, I'll call it a babysitting job, a monitoring job. The contaminants that we have identified, I started to talk a moment ago about tetrachloroethylene or tetrachloroethylene. We call it PERC for short. One of its names is perchloroethylene. This was the best dry cleaning solvent that anyone has come up with. It worked very effectively, came out probably in the late 1940s, and the trouble was, once it had been used and was dirty enough, it wasn't cleaning the clothes anymore, people dumped it. Where did they dump it? It could have gone down sewer lines and leaked out. It could have possibly been dumped out the back door of the business. That's why we have a contaminant plume. Since the dry cleaners went out of using solvents on site, probably in the early to mid 1980s, whatever PERC had already been put there was going to move with gravity downward. One of the traits of chlorinated solvents is this: it doesn't mix with water. It and water don't get together, not like, say, alcohol and water do. So it would have traveled downward with gravity, and when it got to this little body of groundwater that, again, nobody's using, it's just sitting there, very, very slowly moving, the PERC went right through the water. It's a denser than water liquid. And then it came to this Navarro clay and stopped, and then very slowly moved laterally with a little tiny bit of water flow. And then Mother Nature started breaking it down. It breaks down from PERC into something called trichloroethylene. That breaks down into 2 dichloroethylenes. And finally, we have a breakdown product called vinyl chloride. We're measuring all of these. And if we were not to use the MSD, these things would again need active management for many, many years. We'll go to this next map. I'm not advancing. There we go. Okay, sorry, now we advanced a little too far. Okay, yep. I'm sorry, and council members, you're probably advancing your screen just fine, so I apologize for the delay. Tetrachloroethylene, or PERC, you can see on this map the limits in red of the contaminant level that is at or above what we would have in a drinking water as the maximum allowable concentration. And that would be 0.005 milligram per liter, or 5 parts per billion. We have a pretty sizable circle, or not circle, shape around our monitoring wells that show levels above that 0.005 level. That's been the case for the last 2.5 years, and will continue to be the case for probably quite some time. For trichloroethylene, the next map, we see a little bit smaller area with the exceedances of what we call the maximum contaminant level. And then for vinyl chloride, this one is actually the hardest one to get rid of, and it's also got the lowest level allowed in a drinking water supply because it is a very potent cancer-causing chemical and toxic chemical. But this is found down deep. It cannot come back up shallow and get to us humans at ground surface. So again, we're not saying this poses risk, but for the regulatory body, we have to manage it to this 0.002 milligram per liter level to get regulatory closure, unless we apply the MSD. If the MSD gets successfully applied, all of these regulatory cleanup levels are increased by a factor of 100. If we apply the MSD and sample for another 1 to 3 years, we will obtain regulatory closure based on all the data we have so far. Now, Tony Becker is going to come up and describe to you what the geology looks like under this site and this general area to show you how the contaminants are isolated from the San Marcos River, its endangered and threatened species, and isolated from Purgatory Creek, which is our nearest drainage that would lead to the river.
Good afternoon. I'm Tony Becker, geologist with Cal Chapman Engineering. I've been on the project since day one. Did a lot of the monitoring well drilling out here. From the cross-section page, you'll see there is a dark blue triangle at the top, and that's what we gauge and call static water level. The thing about the geology here is that it's very dense silt and clay. We don't encounter any kind of moisture of significance until we get to about 20, 22 feet. At that point, and that's indicated by the non-filled little triangle and the line that goes deeper. And so there's fine sand that basically is carrying this water. That's the initial groundwater table, per se. The water is under hydrostatic pressure. That's what causes this lift. And so we can only gauge the static water level, and it's basically a pressure, an isopoch of the pressure. Below this, silt and clay, the very dense silt and clay and fine sand, is the Navarro clay, very dense, some call it shale. It's known regionally as being an aquitard or an aquiclude, which prohibits water from further migration vertically. And so the first cross-section is kind of a close-in of the site area from basically the source area going through to South Guadalupe Street. This second cross-section is kind of a broader scope, and it shows from a monitoring well that's in the street in South Guadalupe going to another one that is right in front of the mermaid statue just off of South Guadalupe, and then further on to Purgatory Creek. So as you can see, it is 408 feet from monitoring well 201 to monitoring well 205. We have no detections of any of our COCs in 205. From 205 to Purgatory Creek, it's another 718 feet. And once again, the lines indicating static water level versus first contact with water. This is a regional, or I shouldn't say regional, but more of an even broader scope groundwater map showing the flow direction. I did this in conjunction with another consultant who was doing a downtown study. In the lower left-hand corner, there's a red dashed box. That is our investigation area. The two orange lines depict distances to Purgatory Creek to the south, and then the San Marcos River to the east. At closest approach, Purgatory Creek is 1,205 feet from our source area, and San Marcos River is 2,120 feet from our projected source area. From the leading edge of our COC plume, which is underneath South Guadalupe Street, the projections, given the flow rate of the material that we have for a saturated zone, it would be 89 years to 8,900 years to reach Purgatory Creek. And then to reach San Marcos River, it would be 188 years to 18,800 years. And that just basically is the range of the flow mechanics, the hydraulic conductivity that we were working with.
Thank you, Tony. So what we're managing here is contaminants that are very, very slowly moving, and they are very, very slowly breaking down thanks to natural processes. The final breakdown products are carbon dioxide, a little bit of chlorine, and water. So there's not going to be anything left hundreds of years from now to say we ever had a contaminant problem on our hands. The thing is, with the regulatory body, we have to apply their rules, apply their programs, and I'll emphasize once again, if we don't use the municipal settings designation, the city will be monitoring this contaminant plume for an extremely long time before we reach the point we can close it through the regulatory body. If we apply the MSD, we greatly compress that timeline, and we're not causing any additional risk. That's the message right there for the MSD, and now Adam's going to continue.
All right, so the next steps of the MSD process is to notify the well owners of within half a mile of the proposed boundary through certified letters. This is all straight from the TCEQ flowchart for an MSD process. So some of these deadlines would be kind of controlled by an outside agency on their timelines. We would then submit an MSD application to TCEQ, and then we would bring back an ordinance to council for approval probably in the fall, and then submit the passed ordinance, hopefully, to TCEQ, and TCEQ would issue the MSD certificate and notice. This is what staff recommends to proceed with the MSD. Council, with your direction, should we proceed with the MSD process?
Okay, so if we want those questions answered now, I will check with council to see if they have any questions first. And Mr. Gleason, I'm not forgetting that you're online. And do you have any questions?
I have a concept question.
Go ahead, Mr. Scott.
I'm just trying to get a visual on the compression that you say of the chemicals that are down there, and if it went straight through the water and it's sitting in the bottom of the sand, or is it sitting on the clay? Okay. Is there like a level of it that can be measured on how much stuff is down there, or is it just so mixed in that you can't even, you know?
Currently is in groundwater saturated.
Tony?
Yeah, so that the COCs, contaminants of concern, we have identified the source area to be somewhere between where the former buildings were, at the juncture of the, there was a Quonset hut and a brick building there. Somewhere in there, near a floor drain possibly, is where this entered the environment. And it passed straight down, because we don't have any COCs in soil outside of the footprint of the building. We haven't detected any. The initial point where we found the COCs in the soil was at 20 to 22 feet, right where we ran into fine sand lenses.
So I'm just mechanically thinking, is it a way we can follow that down was a pipe to get a measurement and maybe suck it out?
That's what our monitoring wells are doing.
Okay, so then it's just monitoring, they're actually
Yep.
removing, okay.
Yeah, we take groundwater samples out there on a semi-annual basis.
Okay, yeah. That was my question, thank you.
Okay.
So you said that you're taking samples, but are you actually removing, as Mr. Scott asked? Because when I see monitoring well, I get the samples, but that doesn't tell me that we're actually removing, I'm just going to call it crud.
We're purging the volume that's necessary to get stabilization for our samples, and that's what TCEQ really looks for. They don't want us to just go out and grab a sample that the well hasn't been purged. In other words, stagnant water is still sitting there. We remove all that stagnant water via low flow sampling.
Okay.
And so that, per well, it ranges from a half gallon to maybe 2 gallons.
But you're not actually able to remove all of the crud that's
Correct. We're
down
not
there.
under active
Okay.
remediation. We're just doing we finished the initial phase, which is assessment, and now we're basically into the monitoring phase for the TCEQ. Once again, that option, as Cal had alluded to earlier, would be very expensive to use a hydrovac or some other methodology.
Okay.
I'll turn that back
If I could add to this, please. The levels we're measuring in the water are below 1 part per million. Imagine this room could hold 1 million ping pong balls, and all of them but one is white. And that orange one is the one we're after.
Yeah.
We can't drill enough holes in the ground to find where the most stuff is and get it out. That's not cost effective.
Okay.
That's why I was asking you.
Yes, sir.
You said it went through the water, stuff like that. Well, gasoline and
Oh,
water.
Mark, turn your microphone on, because we can't hear you.
Yeah.
And when you see that, it pools. That's why I thought maybe, you know.
Gasoline is far easier to deal with because most of it floats on the groundwater body.
Right.
And we can identify it, we can skim it off. This stuff sinks straight through the water to come up against the tightest geology available. And that boundary down deep of the Navarro clay does things like this.
Okay.
If you're lucky enough to drill into a depression, you might find a little tiny bit of these solvents still there. That's the needle in the haystack hunt. We can't afford to do
Yeah,
that.
I got that.
So we manage it again by putting in enough wells to say, where are the boundaries of the contaminant plume? And then how's it behaving over time and distance?
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any questions?
I have a question.
Turn your microphone on. Yeah, I stepped out to try to get whatever that echo was earlier, and it was because there were microphones on. So we'll need the microphones off unless you're speaking. So go ahead.
Great. It's going to be a couple questions. Maybe I misunderstood. You said you drilled 20 feet and you hit water? And that wasn't the aquifer's water, was it, or was it a different source?
No, this is not Edwards Aquifer. We're separated by the Navarro clay is actually above, it's associated with the Austin Chalk, so it's quite a ways above the aquifer, the Edwards Aquifer. This is just a minor saturated zone. It's not usable, as we know. The moisture in it is basically held within very, very fine sand, possibly wind-blown sands, because this is the Edwards Aquifer is a Cretaceous age, and this is all Quaternary, more recent.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is the table for the Edwards Aquifer is kind of high in different areas here in San Marcos.
Yep.
The letter you're going to send out, that people that have the wells, what actually is that letter going to say? Within the 5 miles, I believe?
0.5.
0.5. Thank you.
It's 0.5.
Let me expand on this. The notices that go out to all of the well owners within, it's a half mile outside the boundary of the proposed MSD. There were already notices given to every public water supply system within a 5-mile reach. That was another screening that had to be done publicly. Just to go to your question also, we call this a perched groundwater body. It's deep enough that you wouldn't dig down into it and try to do anything with it, but it's way shallower than the Edwards Aquifer. And again, it's not usable. No one has ever tried to use this because it's a very tiny amount of water available in total. And you know how the city slopes through that whole area.
Yes.
There's a little tiny bit of water recharging into sandy zones that then communicate with this stuff through our area, but very limited in the amount of water, very limited in the rate of travel, which is all helpful to us for managing the contaminant plume.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now, we know that there are springs downtown, correct? So what about the water that comes up from where's that water coming from?
I looked into some papers, USGS papers and such studies. The springs for Purgatory Creek, the only one that I can identify is farther to the northwest, up gradient quite a bit. The other springs come from Devil's Backbone in that draw. The water that we are studying, as I alluded to with the cross sections, is significantly deeper than the bed of the creeks. It's under hydrostatic pressure, so when we create a monitoring well, we're creating a very low pressure environment. Whereas the water that we're getting, that we're analyzing for, is somewhere uphill, farther higher in elevation, but it's in contact with the sand, and so it wants to stabilize. So when we put in a monitoring well, we've created this low pressure environment, and that water pressure will want to push that up and get it to an equilibrium. But from what we've seen and studied and researched, the water body that we are studying does not have a surface expression as a spring anywhere near here.
So whenever and maybe Ms. Valletta can help me with this, do we, and you'll need to come to the microphone, do we still have springs downtown that flow? We did in years past. There were some behind the tap room. There were some around what's now Vodka Street. There have been springs that have run.
Mayor?
Not
If I could
not like a
address that.
geyser, but
My
there would
response
be
is to-
seeping water, and you think there was a water line break, and it wasn't.
No, I mean, we have historically had some seeps where when we're in periods of very high rainfall.
Right.
Where we will have groundwater. What we don't believe is because of the location of these chemicals, remember Mr. Chapman said they will not come up,
Right.
that even though we might have an increase in this groundwater that would allow it to escape during times of very high rainfall, the chemicals will still stay very low. Is that a valid way to explain that to me?
Yeah, I believe that
Yeah,
this.
I got all that, but I just wanted to ask the specific question about water that we see that comes up to the ground, if that was any way connected to this, and I was hoping the answer was no.
No.
Okay.
And it's been quite some time since we've actually seen those flow. I think it was in the 90s is the last time they've been, really flowing, because that's been a question that we've looked at pretty continuously. He referenced another study, Lisa Arsenault, Sunshine Cleaners, all those wells have been monitoring that downtown to see
Okay.
that, and that they have not been flowing.
Well, I was just thinking back how long it's been since I've heard anybody mention it, so that would explain why this is news to Ms. Valletta's. Some of us just kind of go back a little further than the others, so, okay, then, never mind on that, but there are some people, Mr. Gonzalez and I, that we've heard of this, and there's going to be people that are going to have that same question. So I think we just need to be clear on
If I
that
could
one.
add just a little bit then, because
Yes,
my
sir.
first project working with the city on environmental matters was 97 to 99 over here in the service center with leaking petroleum storage tanks. Those wells we had over there did not have this underground water under pressure because they were more connected to gravel seams and sands that the river deposited only hundreds of thousands of years ago. The soils we're looking at now, when Tony tells you we make the first contact with this water 20 to 22 feet deep, and then it's under pressure because the water body is basically lying uphill of us as we drill that hole.
Okay,
If you saw water seeping out back in the 90s when we had very rainy periods, I will tell you, city utility trenches become conduits that let that water come in and express somewhere. It's not a water leak, but we've stored some water, there's enough gravity push on it, it comes on out. That, I would tell you, looks like a spring for a little while. The one spring Tony researched up Purgatory Creek farther to the northwest is too shallow to be linked to anything we're working on here.
okay. Thank you. Okay, so council, we've had the process and a lot of information given to us. Staff is recommending that we proceed with the MSD process, and then if that's the case, then there's things that we need to do. So are y'all good with that? I need, I'm seeing a yes from Mr. Gonzalez. I'm a yes. Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Gleason?
Me, yes, Mayor, I had my thumb up.
All right, I'm sorry, I didn't have the screen up.
That's okay.
And Ms. Garza, she's got a thumbs up. Mr. Mendoza? Yes. Okay, Mr. Prather is absent this evening. So, Ms. Reyes, you've got all thumbs up on that to proceed. And so, is that all you needed from us, sir?
Yes, ma'am. I'll turn this
Okay.
over to Ms. Josie.
Okay, part two.
Hello, Council. Josie Folletta, Downtown Manager. I have the privilege of discussing the really fun part of the presentation this afternoon. I'll first start with the long-term plans for this property. As we've already discussed today, these parcels were originally purchased to facilitate redevelopment in our downtown. While there have been a lot of conversations about what the final use could be, there is not a set-in-stone plan at this time. Some of the discussions that have taken place are an interest in locating some city offices or facilities on this space. The visual that's shown here was from a recent Campo study where they identified potential office, retail, and housing as potential uses. And as you know, staff are going to be doing a City Hall analysis. I don't know the timeline on that, but I know that is coming up soon, and these parcels will be included in that analysis. So some considerations as we're thinking about the short-term use. The first of these is that we did demolish the buildings for public safety in February earlier of this year. We do need to keep the existing foundations from those buildings in place as we're approaching these short-term uses. The engineering team can talk about why that's so, but it has to do with the fact that we don't want to disturb the plume that they've just spent time discussing. So whatever uses we do have, we want to make sure that we're not digging into the ground. We also want to make sure that we are in compliance with our city's land development code, which I'll discuss on future slides. And then since this is an interim use, we want to make sure that the improvements are prioritized by effectiveness and cost efficiency. So here is a visual of the short-term uses and where we're recommending for those to take place. We are recommending parking as the first short-term use and an activation, which I'll talk about in a moment, as the second. The parking would take place as a bit of a parking sandwich, if you will. It'll be on the top and bottom parcels. And then the activation will take place in the center. That center area is where the previous buildings were, so that's where that foundation is that's not suitable for parking because it's uneven, and we would, there are measures that we would take to make it flat for the activation, but we would not want to park cars there. For the activation area, we have the benefit of design services from the Texas Main Street program. Those are professional architectural services for renderings of the space. That is something that is free to us. I shouldn't say free, it's included with the cost of our annual membership as a Main Street city. So that is not an additional cost for the city, which is a huge benefit. So I'll talk about parking first. Our team did look at the two lots that I mentioned earlier, and we estimate that we could get around 70 parking spaces. We are recommending that those spaces be used for short-term parking. Firstly, because of the location of these lots and their proximity to the center of downtown. And secondly, because we want to make sure we're supporting the activation uses at the center, and we think short-term parking would do that best. We also, as I mentioned before, want to make sure we're in compliance with land development code. That could look like, closing some of the curb cuts or the driveways that do enter into this lot from Guadalupe Street. It could look like putting some additional screening or landscaping to hide the parking spaces because we don't want them to be on street front. There are a couple of different things that we would need to look into, but the primary point is that the lot entrances would look a little bit different if we're making sure that we're in compliance with our own land development code. And then finally, we are looking at potential partnerships with adjacent properties. That is more in the activation topic, which I'll go into next. So, short-term activation. This is what I like to call the fun slide. There are lots of ideas and amenities that we could consider for this activation. I know it's hard to see on this screen, but hopefully on your screens, the photo on the right that you can see, that is a photo that I took in downtown Lockhart a few months ago. Our Main Street Advisory Board took a visit to Lockhart, and we noticed that there was a city lot in their downtown that they had done some very minimal improvements to as a short-term activation. So that really jogged our memory. We deliberately went to Lockhart to look at what they were doing, and we saw this lot, and it immediately made us think of our lots here in San Marcos. I know it's hard to tell from the photo, but the minimal improvements include seating, lighting, and there is a restroom trailer at the back. The top photo is an example of the design services that we can expect from the Texas Main Street team. They're very professional. They have architects on their team that are available to provide these services for us. And some of the options that we're asking council to explore or to think about and consider are lighting, seating, shade structures, bicycle and scooter parking, bathroom and or water facilities, a stage, and then of course programming and events. We want to activate the space. We've already reached out to colleagues at the Art Squared Arts Market and also the Farmers Market, and they're definitely interested in continuing conversations. The Farmers Market about adding a weeknight market to their weekly schedule, and Art Squared as having an overflow area so that they can accommodate additional vendors. So what we are asking for your input on, well, I should say our staff recommendation is to move forward with both of these items. Number one is parking, number two is some type of activation. And then what we're asking your input on is, are you interested in parking? If you are interested in parking as a use, would you like staff to also explore paid parking as an option just in this lot? If you are interested in activations for the central area, what type of activations would you like for us to explore? Are you interested in learning more about all of the above? Are there some that are most important to you? What we will do after we hear your direction is staff will go back to the drawing board. We'll collaborate with our stakeholders, including the Parking Advisory Board, especially if we're using parking as a use. We will look at our budget and see what budget is available and what budget sources are available to us. And we'll work with the Texas Main Street program and build an actual site plan for you to review, and we'll come back with that later, potentially in the fall. So that concludes my very short presentation. I'm available for questions, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
All right, thank you very much. Council, first, questions, and then I'm going to go around the table and ask you all of these questions. But any other questions at this point in time? My question is the lot on Hutchison Street that we spent a lot of money on, how much does that get used? Because I try to drive there instead of Hopkins Street sometimes just for various and sundry reasons.
Yes.
I don't see a lot of use.
So you're referring to the Downtown Mobility Hub,
Yep.
which is on Hutchison Street. It gets used in a very quiet way, I would say. I see people eating lunch there. We've installed a little free library, so I've seen people reading books with their children. It was never really designed as a central space for performances or things of that nature. Like, it's not quite set up for it. The space is not quite large enough. Maybe if it was designed that way, it's also not being used that way. Main Street has tried to host events there, and it's just a little constrained in terms of space for us to be able to host actual events. So I do see people using it, but I would say it's more of a slow trickle than, having large-scale events there. It just isn't quite large enough for that.
Okay. To our council members that are online, Mr. Gonzalez, microphone, please.
Thank you, Mayor. We said about 70 spots,
Yes, sir.
and that's going to be a one-story, or would that be
So this is just striping for the existing space that's there. Again, this is just an interim use, so we're not really adding a ton to the space. We would just identify which spaces are best suited for parking. We would stripe it for that and come up with a plan.
And how does an individual pay to, who's going to monitor that?
So those are the details that we would sort out once we hear from council that you're interested in that as a use. We would definitely want to work with our parking manager. We would want to work with our parking advisory board. So I can't present those details
Okay,
to you because
just
we haven't developed them
thinking
yet.
outside the box.
We really
Yeah.
just want to hear from you. Is this a use that you're interested for staff to explore? And if you are, we'll work with our partners and come back to you with a more fully vetted plan.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's do the parking question first, and it's 2 questions. It's should we even look at parking? And secondly, do we want to talk about paid parking? So that's 2 separate questions. I'll start with you, Mr. Gonzalez. And this is just, if we say paid parking, that means we want to look at it and staff will come back and bring us a plan that we may go, great, and we may go, maybe not. Because if we start talking about paid parking, we're not going to get one system for this. We need to talk about what we're going to do, if we're ever going to do anything anywhere else. It's a much bigger question. But it's just, do we want to consider paid parking in this land that we own?
I like to consider that just to help us with some of the costs downtown. And yes, I'd like to consider having that parking lot.
Okay. Mr. Scott?
I kind of want to hear what the Parking Advisory Board has to say, because I kind of.
Would you like them to consider it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And for paid also?
I'm not so much in the paid yet.
All right. So you're a no on that one. Let's see, for our people who are off-site, Mr. Gleason.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I'm open to the idea of having the parking, and as far as the paid goes, we can have the Parking Advisory Board explore it. I may not be for it, but we may as well kind of look at it and see what we can come up with, especially since we're talking about some additional paid parking around town.
Okay. Mr. Mendoza, and then I'll ask Ms. Garza.
I'm absolutely all for the parking, and I think that we definitely should send this to our Parking Advisory Board just to take a look at paid parking, but just to get an idea of how we should take that step. But yes, ma'am, I'm for both of them.
Okey-doke. Ms. Garza?
Yeah, I agree. I'm never like a fan of paid parking, to be honest. I'm cheap, but yeah, I think it's a disservice if we don't at least see what the Parking Advisory Board comes up with. I don't know. They've been able to come up with some interesting things, so.
Okay, and I will be a yes and send it to the Parking Advisory Board. So that's where we end up on those 2. But also, Ms. Folletta has brought us some ideas and I got to find out where that place is in Lockhart. I was at the Gaslight Baker Theater Saturday, but I didn't drive around enough.
It's on a corner. I can't remember the name of the streets off the top of my head.
But it's like within a block or 2 of the square?
It's on the square. It is a corner lot on the square that's set for future development.
Okay.
It is owned by the city.
I think I know where it is.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it more towards the front?
Okay. I think it's, well, I don't know the street names either, so. Well, if it's on the square, it ain't gonna take long to go around and find out. So, do we want to explore some activations for this space? And if your answer is yes, if you will look at that list that's up there and tell me which items you are interested in. Who wants to go first? I think Mr. Gleason wants to go first.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I went along with Main Street, and when we went over there, and that little corner that they had activated was really neat, and it was being utilized. Of course, they were having their walk at night, but it didn't look like there was a whole lot of infrastructure put into place, and it was definitely being utilized.
You're talking about Lockhart.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I'm definitely open to looking at any of these activations for the non-parking areas. I'm open to anything we can utilize that space without having to put a lot of money and time into it.
Okay.
Same.
And
I'm on the same page
hold
on
on. Mr. Mendoza.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering, what is the possibility and infrastructure problems we run into for a splash pad in that area?
Just thinking off the top of my head, water is one of them.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
something we would already look into, is utilities, both electric and water. And also, given that we're in drought restrictions right now,
Right.
that would be a huge consideration of mine.
Okay.
But I think
Yeah,
those two
that wouldn't be a
things-
temporary use.
That's kind of what I was wondering, is that just something that's installed, we're done with it and it has to stay
Long-term.
there? Okay. The only issue I have with anything on this is the stage. And my issue is it being right up against the neighborhoods. And it's just, I would feel that having a stage there without regulations, like we can't have anything at night, would cause a nuisance for some of our neighbors being so close.
What neighbors?
there. In Martin Luther King, that neighborhood right there. It goes, if you look at the
Yeah,
map.
but we don't go all the way to MLK.
No, but just talking sound, things like that. When I was on planning and zoning, we had a couple of complaints.
Oh, yeah, there's
When
been
industry-
complaints about places that are closer, so.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're saying stage no because of noise,
Just of
basically?
noise, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what about the rest of it?
I'm fine with everything else, yes.
Yeah, you're saying that. So you're saying no with the programming and events?
I think those can exist without the stage itself. We've seen those happen with all the other events that we have, little booths or something
Okay.
like that.
All right. Mr. Scott,
Yeah, I'm fine.
we need you on your microphone.
Yeah, I'm fine with what they're suggesting. The stage, I'm not too concerned about, except at night, and that was a good point. And if we did build a stage there, what would that cost? And are they temporary? That doesn't sound very temporary to me. So,
Once we get the list of preferred amenities, we'll go cost all of that out. We'll see
Okay.
what the options are. We'll compare against, the temporary nature versus sturdiness and longevity. We'll do all of that research after we hear back.
yeah, and I
Come
like
back
the
with you.
idea of the farmer's market out there too. I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Or even other things, so.
Yeah, I think it'd be a great place for the farmer's market maybe, and for the Art Squared. Ms. Garza, need you back on camera, please. Okay, and then I'll go to Mr. Gonzalez next.
I'm good with
Oh, I'm
it.
sorry. Sorry, my fingers are wet, and so I couldn't touch my phone. This is complicated. I'll let Mr. Gonzalez go first while I finish my notes.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm good with everything that was mentioned that Councilman Gleason brought up, Mayor,
Including the stage?
including the stage.
Okay, let's see, Mr. Prather is not here. Me, Ms. Garza, okay. Ms. Garza?
Yeah, I'm down to explore the parking as short-term use. This is what we're answering, right? But, okay, there's one,
This
I
is
don't know,
the.
whatever, just explore whatever.
This is the
Everything.
non-parking, the lighting, seating, shade, bike and scooter parking, bathroom,
Bike and
water
scooter.
facilities, stage, programming, and events.
Yeah, I'm fine with whatever the majority decides. Yeah.
Okay, I think it would be good to use part of that area. Anytime we have parking for vehicles, I think we should have bike and scooter parking. To me, that's just a given. I like the Edison lights strung around, and I think that's really good. I think we should have seating, some kind of shade structure. If you're going to have a gathering place, you need to have restroom facilities. I'm a no on the stage, and I'm concerned about the programming and events, and the only thing I'm concerned about there is the noise. If we're talking about just gathering people getting together, that's fine. If we're talking about a band and amplifiers, I am a No. So that's where I am about the programming, and that's why I'm a no on the stage, because we might use the stage for other things, but we're also getting into some expense that I'm not sure I want to get into for temporary space.
Mayor, if it's all possible, I'd like to take my vote back and go no with the stage and the programming of events. Say
Okay.
no to those two.
That programming events, we need to be less noise,
Right.
large noise things.
Everything else is good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so it looks like we're all yeses on everything. There's some cautions about the stage. I've got only 3 of us are a no on the stage, but we'll have some cautions, and then also just the cautions on the programming and events, which of course we can control at any time without worrying about expense.
Yes.
So, council, are we good with that?
We're good.
All righty. Ms. Flood, did you need anything else from us, dear?
No, ma'am. I did just want to reiterate that staff are going to go explore all of these items now. We don't know what our budget looks like, and so we might not be able to deliver on all of these items.
Yeah.
So we'll go back and we'll examine what can we afford, what are some options with the site plan, and then we'll come back to you and let you know like what the cost estimates look like, and then we can make some further decisions.
Yep. It's going to be more like having a picnic instead of going to a restaurant.
Yes, ma'am.
All
That's
right.
a great analogy.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Reyes, is there anything else you need from us on this? Okay, then we can proceed on to item 2.
The city council will convene an executive session pursuant to the following sections, chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code. A, section 551.071, consultation with attorney regarding pending litigation. 1, Money et al. Versus City of San Marcos, civil action number 123 CV-718-RP, United States District Court, Western District, Austin Division, and 2, Servini et al. Versus City of San Marcos, civil action number 121-CV-00568-RP, United States District Court, Western District, Austin Division. B, section 551.8087, economic development, to receive a briefing and deliberate on project Grand Slam. C, section 551.089, security advisor security audits, and section 551.071, consultation with attorney to deliberate the deployment or specific occasions for implementation of security personnel, critical infrastructure, or security devices and associated legal issues.
Need a motion to go into executive session?
Second.
So move.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Gonzalez and a second by Mr. Scott. Mr. Vino?
All right, Mr. Scott.
Aye.
Mayor Houston.
Aye.
Ms. Garza. Mr. Gleason.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Garza. Mr. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Mr. Mendoza. And Mr. Prather, he is absent.
All
Motion
right, we'll
passes
go
6-0.
to executive session at 4:03 PM. Council, if you convened our work session. We concluded our executive session at 5:41, and we are now to our next item of business, which is Q&A with the press and public. Is there anyone in chambers who wishes to ask a question? If not, we will go to our online Q&A folks.
Ms. Capoletta.
Is she, there she is. Ms.
Hey,
Capoletta, 3 minutes.
Okay, I guess it would be nice if you read the ground rules because they change every week.
No, they don't change every week. You have 3 minutes to ask your questions.
Okay, so did you want me to read all the questions at the same time, or did
Yes,
you? We're doing
please.
it- Okay, so the question number 1 is, why is there not a separate line item for the ecological deconstruction of the problem, and then a second line item for actual potential uses of the property? That's number 1. Number 2 is, why is the cost of remediation not in the packet for city council members to make some sort of cost-benefit analysis, so that, because it would be the most ethical course of action to proceed, right? So it makes sense that our elected officials would have the information of the cost to remediate versus the cattywampus quick fix way that you guys are doing it. Number 3 is, why is the cost of the consultants that presented today not in the packet for the public, so that we know the final drive-out price of this property acquisition, which happened under the cloak of darkness, and the public can read the article that I posted with the San Marcos Corridor News some 3 years ago, editorial, ecological issues accompanying the council's $2.4 million blight bailout. Number 4, the sinkhole. I'm not understanding why there hasn't been an analysis by city staff presented to you guys. I feel like you're jumping the gun, and I'm not understanding why this is not a separate item to do an analysis of the potentiality of a sinkhole, which I've been warning city staff now for 15 years. Greg Schwartz had a study. They kind of took me on a snipe hunt. Greg Schwartz is a nice guy, but when you take about the proximity of the river, as well as all of the road construction and the high rises, it seems like that would be the proper course of action to make sure, before we make a decision of what we want to do with it, that we're not going to have a sinkhole. Number 5, I believe that this is within the purview of the Neighborhood Commission because of the proximity to an African and Hispanic neighborhood, and I'm very troubled that nobody brought this up, and I'm kind of wondering why that wasn't on your radar. Number 6, he's talking about Navarro clay, which is what a lot of us have warned y'all about, is exemplified by the water inside the garage at the high rise. And so I'm wondering if city staff can give us an analysis if any more high rises should not be built in that area because of the Navarro clay that he is referencing. Number 7, I believe that Mr. Scott is asking a very important question, and I believe that you guys need to have further conversations with your consultants. He's asking about remediation. Your consultant answered about monitoring. Number 8 is public wells are different than private wells because public wells have safety valve mechanisms so that they can clean the water. And I'm wondering, I published this article in 2020, why the city staff have not taken upon themselves to make the ethical course of action to warn those well owners 3 years ago, and why they're suddenly waiting until today. It seems it's a very toxic substance. I'm the one that got the last set of perk plume barrels cleaned up, and I just find it troubling.
Okay, Ms. Capoletta, I will ask our staff if these can be answered at this point in time, or if a more thorough response can be provided by email. Mr. Pentalian?
Yes, I will have to, and I appreciate Professor Capoletta's questions, all very good questions.
Yeah.
I will have to refer to the project team.
Okay.
The question on high rises, obviously, whenever there are buildings that are constructed that I know that they hire geotechnical engineers, and depending on the substrate and all the borings that are done, they design the shoring systems for those and the piers to accommodate any type of soils. When you look at a lot of the high rises in Houston that are built on alluvial soil, so really it's not, the presence of clay does not negate the ability to build high-rise apartments or any type of buildings. And I see Assistant City Manager Moyer here, if she would like to answer any of those questions as well. But I think to provide a reasonable answer for the 8 questions, we'll have to do that in writing.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to see that detailed because Ms. Capoletta did have several really good questions. And can we post those responses on the message board associated with this meeting? So the public who's interested in this topic, hopefully they'll know that message board, and that's where those answers should go. Ms. Capoletta, they will go to you, and I'm sure that answers will be copied to the council.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Can I request email it to us also?
I just said that.
Well, I thought I was just going to message board it.
No, I just said, and you're going to email the council members.
My apologies, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So that takes care of that. And there's no one in chambers or in the lobby wishing to ask a question. And so I will accept a motion to adjourn. A motion from, I heard Mr. Scott first, but I'll give Mr. Mendoza the second, and Ms. Trevino.
Mr. Gleason.
Aye.
Mayor Houston.
Aye.
Ms. Garza. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Mendoza. Mr. Prather and Mr. Scott.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
All righty. And we will conclude this meeting at 5:50.